Good morning and welcome to Day 3, Edition X, Tata Steel Kolkata Literary Meet. Our first session today is presenting Kevin Kwan. The author of Crazy Rich Asians talks to Shunali Khullar Shroff about his new book, Sex and Vanity. Shunali Khullar Shroff is the best-selling author of Love in the Time of Affluenza and Battle Hymn of a Bewildered Mother. She writes on travel, modern Indian life, culture, and feminism for a host of publications. Joining us from LA today is Kevin Kwan, the author of Crazy Rich Asians, the best-selling novel that has been translated into more than 40 languages. For several weeks in 2018, Crazy Rich Asians trilogy commanded the top three positions of the New York Times bestseller list, and the film adaptation became Hollywood's highest-grossing romantic comedy in over a decade. The author was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. His most recent novel, Sex and Vanity, was published in 2020 and is now being adapted into a feature film by Sony Pictures. Over to you, Shunali.
Hey, Kevin, good evening.
Good morning to you. Or is it good
That,
afternoon? I'm not sure
well,
what the time it is, actually.
it's a good morning, but
Okay.
it's a pleasure to spend a Saturday evening, your Saturday evening with you.
Exactly. This is how we party in LA.
I, clearly.
Um,
So congratulations to you on two accounts, on the stupendous success of yet another book, a book that has released during a very challenging year when book promotions have not been easy and bookstores haven't been open, and Sex and Vanity has done so well. So a really big congratulations for that. And the second one is for the Joe Biden presidency. I know what that means to you.
Thank you. Thank you on both counts. And on both counts, like I could not have done it without all the lovely readers around the world that, responded, that were so supportive, that bought my books. And then, of course, to all the lovely voters who also voted for Joe Biden and, gave him a 7 million majority in
Yeah.
the voting in the election. So it was always a group effort.
Well, as long as it's been rewarding for everybody, and especially you, because I really enjoyed your book. It was a great escape, not just for me, for a lot of people when we were absolutely housebound in our apartments in Bombay. In LA, you live with big bungalows, and in Calcutta, people live in apartments and bungalows as well. But by and large, everybody was really leading a very circumscribed life. So your book at that time took us to Capri, made us laugh, entertained us, and made some of us even fall in love. So thank you for that. Uh, I wanted to ask you, how has the pandemic been treating you the past 1 year?
I think like most people, it's ever evolving. And I think what I've learned from the past year is you have to really live in the present and make the most out of what you have on a very daily basis, and be grateful for what you have. So, I mean, for me, it's been a time of learning, a time of reflection, and it actually happened in a positive way, because the alternative, if I hadn't been under lockdown, is I would have been traveling 8 months of last year and probably very jet lagged and probably going a bit nuts with all the travel. So in a strange
Yeah.
way, I think, things happen for a reason. And I'm really hoping I try to see the silver linings in everything, but it is extremely challenging, as I'm sure it is for everyone in India as well. Things are no different here. Maybe they're even, I don't really know what the situation on the ground is, but, in LA, things are pretty bleak. Hospitals are full. We are ground zero with the pandemic. We have the most cases in the country right now and the most deaths every day. And of course, today they opened up all the restaurants, and the restaurants are packed, and the
Okay.
streets are like Disneyland. And I'm not going outdoors, but I'm just looking at this going, what can you do? you know.
I think people have been captive for far too long.
Yeah,
This is expected to happen. India is,
exactly.
everybody is out right now, by the way. India has been
Yeah.
open a while in that sense. So anyway, so moving on, uh, Sex and Vanity has done really well. It's, figured on a whole lot of best books to read this year. It's on the Times must-read list of 2020 as well. Uh, when you first set this book out into the world, were you nervous, given the unprecedented success that Crazy Rich Asians, the trilogy, the movie had? I mean, you have this monster you've created behind you, and was there any trepidation in you when you sent this book out?
The trepidation didn't have anything to do with Crazy Rich Asians and the success of that. If anything, that gave me a confidence to really sort of write a book that to me is quite different, that allows me to branch out and try something new and be a little more experimental and actually have more fun. So what worried me really was whether the book should even be coming out this year at all. This year as in last year. So I did have many conversations with my editors and with the publishers and saying, and this was the early days, of course. We had to make a decision in March and April whether or not we were going to go for it and release the book in the summer. And I said, is this the right moment? Like, I don't want to be tone deaf. People are suffering.
Yeah.
And this is a book that is very joyous, and it's very escapist. And they convinced me that that's exactly what people need right now. They need to escape into something. They need to armchair travel. But I was very conscious of not wanting to in any way sort of offend and have a book that was tone deaf for the moment. But by and large, people really, really loved it. And I've heard, from so many people that it was, just the escape they needed. So I understand that.
It really was that.
Yeah, I personally have read so many more novels this year myself because I've needed escape.
What have you been reading? Some just off the top of your head.
Off the top of my head, let's see. A Beautiful Crime by Christopher Bolin was one of the first books I read in the middle of the pandemic that really, really cheered me up. It's set in Venice. It's sort of like The Talented Mr. Ripley, but set in modern times, and was just a lovely escape to Venice. And then more recently, there's a book coming out next month by the author Sandy Tan called Lurkers. And it is Lurkers. It's one of the most brilliant books I've read in a long, long time.
Really?
Really, truly. I mean, so original, so quirky, so edgy. There's not much more I can say about it. This is amazing. So everyone should read that. So,
Yeah, we'd love to get our hands on that.
Yeah.
You said that Crazy Rich Asians was about Crazy Rich Asians, but Sex and Vanity is a lot more personal. It is straight from my heart and more me, is what you've said recently in an interview. I think that was to me.
Oh, really? I was going, when did I say that?
In what ways is it personal to you?
Well, I think it draws very directly from my experiences living in Manhattan, for 22 years. So part of the book is an exploration of New York high society, and in particular, the world of the WASP high society. This would be the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant elite that for centuries sort of ruled New York society. But of course, things have changed now. The WASP elite has sort of been superseded by all the international rich and all the new gazillionaires that now live in New York. But so in many ways, it was a love letter to my 22 years living in New York and many of the adventures I had and my personal experiences being able to peek behind the curtain of these other elite worlds, that I was definitely not a part of, but was allowed to visit occasionally.
But you do know, I mean, you've straddled both these worlds. One is a literary world and the other world, because you've come from an old money family yourself, from, originally from Singapore, and then you moved to the US when you were 11. But the sort of insight that you have into these lives is obviously, there's a lot of proximity there. You have a ringside view to those people's lives. And which brings me to my next question, which is that how difficult is it to create characters out of people you know so well, especially if you're writing satire, where you know that people could sort of identify themselves in one or more than one characters and then possibly hold a grudge against you?
Well, so that's a really great question, I have to say. For this book, for Sex and Vanity, it was perhaps easier because I was working under the framework of a story that already exists. This book is sort of an homage to A Room of a View by E.M. Forster, one of my favorite novels. So I had the framework of where I wanted to take these characters. So there's a deniability there. I can say, oh, it's not based on you, it's based on Lucy Honeychurch from E.M. Forster.
That's right.
But not to be facetious, but I feel like as an observer, and when I do write satire, I tend to look at characters at large. I don't try to satirize or characterize single people. So even the characters that I create that I'm making fun of, they're amalgams of lots of people. So there's not one person that would be able to look at the book and read the book and go, oh, that's me.
Right.
So I don't ever want to offend, and I'm never there to try to sort of like embarrass or humiliate or try to poke fun at people. I'm using satire to look at issues, to look at human nature. So and they are fictional characters for the most part.
No, indeed they are. Some of the anecdotes sounded like they could have been real. And for the viewers who haven't read this book, there are lots of little pretentious characters who are over the top and doing crazy things. There's also very wealthy Chinese people American Chinese people whose their idea of hospitality and their largesse is extremely demonstrative. It's to pay for somebody's room and pick up the dinner and the lunch tab, and it's really, in that sense, something that in a non-Eastern tradition could be looked at as extreme pomposity and show off. And so there are lots of these anecdotes that the book is full of, which I thought some of them might have been picked up from real life, which is why I asked you this question.
And in fact, many of them are, but I think the humor comes in the culture clash, in seeing, this, the heroine of my book, Lucy Tang Churchill, she is a biracial Chinese American. So one side of her family is American born Chinese, but the other side is this very rarefied, waspy, old New York blue blood world that's very, very, tight upper lip, very, very much like the British in a way, And so when you bring into that fold a new money Chinese family, that doesn't play by those rules, to me, that's when the sparks fly in many different ways. And that, to me, that's the catalyst that creates all the drama and the romance and the intrigue.
Mrs. Zhao, by the way, was one of my favorite characters. She was so endearing.
Thank you.
I mean, she could be annoying, but she was so good-hearted and so endearing. And that's the thing. You laughed. You have satirized these people, but you've done it very gently. So you don't even somebody as obnoxious as Cecil. At some point, you can put a distance and just laugh at him. And he's possibly the most pretentious character that I've ever read in a book, even outside of E.M. Forster and Dominic Dunn. But you cock a snook at the snobbery of the patrician classes, and then at the same time you satirize the desperate pretensions of the new rich. And while doing that, you also take swipes at racism. What I want to ask you is that does satire about white people in a white country written by a non-white person get taken seriously? And is there any backlash to that?
I mean, that's not for me to judge, right? I don't know if people are taking it seriously, quite frankly.
Just based on feedback.
Yeah, based on feedback, I would say that, the readers love it, my fans love it. And it's interesting. This is the first book where the reviews have been a little more mixed. I've been very lucky in the sense that my last 3 books were, just overwhelmingly positively received.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, there were a few reviewers who were not as enthusiastic about the book. But it's interesting to me. A lot of them missed the point.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
unable to look at it beyond the lens of their own expectation. And one reviewer actually basically implied, like, how dare you write about us?
That's the thing. Yeah.
Like, stay in your own lane. As long as you're writing about these funny, crazy rich Asians, we love you. But when
Yeah.
you turn your lens to something that's much closer to home, this reviewer sort of bristled, and so I was highly amused to learn that. So I love seeing the viewpoints. I actually really sort of enjoy when it's a good critic. I love good criticism, and I love to see what their entry points are and what their problems are with the
Yeah.
book. And it's always so subjective, right? And it's always comes from such a personal place, I find.
It's true.
It's more revealing of the reviewer than the actual book.
It absolutely
Yeah.
is. In fact, I loved how you tackled the complex themes of race, social class, and even gender inequality, because uh, Lucy's mother is a genetic scientist, but she's only ever spoken as the wife of this white, uh, you know, patriarch, white patrician man who is really fifth generation Mayflower or sixth generation, whatever. Um, so you sneak that in, and it was very beautifully done, because then you realize that while he's making you laugh and entertaining you and talking about people's wealth and chronicling their lifestyles and the way they go about it, he has also tackled some very, very pertinent issues there. uh, so what I wanted to ask you was that, did this happen very naturally as a matter of course while you were writing it? Or were these the themes you wanted to tackle? And of course, you loved a room with a view, and then you decided that I will use that. Of course, that was a satire on Edwardian society, and this is on modern day American upper class society. But was it a deliberate attempt to make a story and weave these factors in?
It was really a bit of both, I have to say. And this
Hmm.
story had a long gestation period. I really, you know, even while I was writing the last few books in the Crazy Rich Asians trilogy, I was already thinking of the next book. What do I want to do next? And I
Hmm.
always knew, like, I've spent 3 books in Asia. For me, it makes sense to come back to America and really show what it's like to be Asian American in America.
Hmm.
And to add even more complexity, I want this character to be biracial, because I do have so many friends and family members who are biracial, and so I have had a very close up look at the issues and the complexities that exist in being biracial in this country. So that's something I wanted to sort of really try to capture and bring a light to.
Hmm.
And so just thinking of all those concepts, it really seemed like using a room of view as a framework would be
Hmm.
really fun to sort of, how do I take this classic story, but really reinvent it, So the book really becomes, it's a departure point for my book, really,
Sure. Yeah.
but it's nice to play with, it's nice to honor something that I loved so much. And to take these characters, but
Indeed,
also
it is.
make them completely relevant for this generation. E.M. Forster's book, Lucy Honeychurch, she's a girl that is growing up in 1908. And
Yeah.
she is caught between the Victorian society and the Edwardian society, which for her
Yeah.
is this modern, brave new world. And so she's really pulled on both sides. How do I capture that tension, that struggle, in someone in 2020?
Hmm.
And so it just was sort of perfect. Like, of course, she has to be biracial, and of course, she has to be struggling with these 2 sides of herself, and 2
Hmm.
very different cultures and 2 very different layers of expectations, and
Yeah.
also 2 different classes, because her mother's family is just very solid middle class,
Hmm.
American-born Chinese, and her father's family comes from the creme de la creme. So how do you reconcile both? And
Yeah.
for me, it was a way really to look at racism through a different lens,
Hmm.
through the lens of all the small microaggressions
Hmm.
that can exist in a quote unquote enlightened society. you know.
Yeah.
As someone said to me, it's like, I love the fact that you can show how very smart, educated people can also be very racist.
Yeah. So, since while we're discussing Lucy's being biracial, the fact that despite her privileged upbringing, her being biracial in America deprives her of of a strong sense of self, and the whole book is her journey towards that self-realization. How much does our race define who we are going to be as individuals when we are living outside of our own countries? I'm asking you this based on your own experience as a Chinese American,
Yeah,
Singaporean Chinese.
and
Yeah.
I think it really depends on the individual, and it really depends on how they were brought up and the values and what was instilled in them by their parents, and also where they grew up and the
Mm,
circumstance they grew up in. You know, I, for one, for example, I consider myself very, very lucky. I really assimilated into I moved to America when I was 11 years old,
mm,
which is not an easy time,
yeah.
to move, to be uprooted from a country and to be moved to a completely different world.
Right.
But
Right.
I had the advantage of growing up in Singapore, and English being my first language, first of all, is an
Right.
advantage. So I didn't have to come here and learn a new language.
Yeah.
I spoke better English than I did at age 11 than I do now. Like, it's gotten progressively worse
That's
the
hard to
longer
believe.
I'm in this country, and I think for myself, having grown up in Singapore my first 11 years, where the Chinese, and growing up in a family where it's like you are the majority,
Mm,
you develop a sense of self, right?
mm,
Um, that is sort of unshakable. So when I moved here at 11, I didn't see myself as an inferior,
mm,
to Caucasian Americans by any means,
mm, mm,
so I didn't have those complexes, and I could very easily just get along with everyone in a way. Whereas I soon learned that that's not the case for a lot of Asian Americans, the ones who are born in America, who grew up their
mm,
whole lives as a minority. It's a very, very different experience. They don't have those role models who are in power,
mm,
and empowered in the way that they need them to be.
mm.
I'm not, I don't want to generalize here, because everyone has a different experience. So,
Sure.
and I think it's also important to see that, for biracial people, what's interesting is that it's not a monolithic experience.
Mm,
Being biracial in America, everyone has such a different experience.
mm,
I have friends who, grew up in New York City, who were the most popular people in their schools, because it
right.
was cool to be this, intriguing biracial character. At the
Right.
same time, I have friends in Texas who struggled. They felt like complete freaks, you know. So everyone has a different experience, and it's so much based on where you are and who you're around and how you were raised, I think.
So, how much of Kevin Kwan is rooted in his Chinese values, and what part of you is American? How much of you is American because you spent the bulk of your life growing up in the US?
Um, I think my Chinese relatives would say that I'm probably 100% American.
Oh, is it right?
Yeah, I think they would see that there's nothing Chinese in me. I like to think that there's still a bit of a Chinese Singaporean values and in me. So I don't know, 20% maybe. You know,
Speaking of which, have you
I'm good at
watched?
following rules. I wear my mask. I wash my hands. So yeah, apologies.
Your Crazy Rich Asians spun off a whole genre of writing and cinema and TV shows. And I was recently asked to review the Bling Empire for a publication. And that's when I first watched it. And the Bling Empire, and it's stated very clearly that it's inspired by Crazy Rich Asians, and it
Really?
documents the life.
Okay.
Have you watched even one
I
episode?
have not. Well, I've not watched it. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it is a masterclass in rich Chinese and Asians and Koreans, their community in LA. And the way they live, they go about their lives, they all have American education, they have American accents, but a very big part of their everyday life is still influenced by the Orient or the East, in the sense that the food they eat and the restaurants they patronize, the festivals they celebrate. Uh, are these people your friends by any chance?
I wouldn't think so. I don't know any of the characters, or I haven't seen the
You
show,
must you must watch one
but
episode
I
at
haven't
least.
heard from anyone that, oh, I'm starring in this
I
by any
see.
means. And it's strange, even though I'm living in LA now. I don't, aside from my friends who are part of the cast of Crazy Rich Asians, the
Hmm.
actors and John Chu, the director, I don't really hang out with the crazy rich Asians of Los Angeles. I'm not rich enough, first of all, to fit in their crowd. My friends are writers and artists and people who we don't run in those circles. Put it this way.
I'd
Yeah,
love for you to watch it and tell me what you thought about this show and how real
yeah.
is it to the real lives of these people, or at least what you imagine it is.
Yeah, it's
You
interesting.
once,
I've never really been a fan of reality TV because to me,
yeah,
I can't talk about this show because I haven't seen it, but I
sure,
assume that a lot of the drama is manufactured,
it
right?
is manufactured. Yes,
So like for me,
I can't
I
bear it
lose
either.
interest. I lose interest when
Yeah,
there's no authenticity, so that's
yeah,
why I love to either see documentaries or I like to go straight into, like, there's so much great TV that's fictional TV,
yes.
for example, that I love to watch. So, but I might, on your recommendation, I'll watch an episode and tell you what I think of it.
I didn't know it existed, and I don't watch reality
Yeah,
TV, but I did for this sake. And I was like, oh, he doesn't even know there's somebody building an entire series out of his, inspired
yeah.
by him. He should know about this. Your eye for detail. A lot of, I think, the Atlantic, it was the Atlantic that described your book, Sex and Vanity, as the plot is dishy and delightful with all sorts of bad behavior performed in couture.
That's a
It's an
nice
excellent
description.
line. And then it goes on to say Kevin Kwan celebrates and skewers the wealthy. Uh, Anybody who has read your books will understand your love for couture, design, art. Um, but what I want to know is that given the fact that you sit and wrote this book out within 4 months towards the end of 2019, um, how can you describe things as if they are all right in front of your eyes? Clothes, couture, the latest fashion, designs, architecture. What
Well,
gift is this?
the one thing I will admit to is, and I think it's as much a blessing as a curse, is I have a photographic memory. So whenever I go to a place, I remember every detail of a room, of a situation, so I can really retain and read and describe it very well. So, and I always say this with all my books, like, if I haven't been there, I'm not going to write about it because I can't fake it. You know what I mean?
Hmm,
So
right.
every restaurant, every private club, every house, you see, in my books is really based on a real space. When it comes to fashion, of course, I don't wear women's fashion. So,
Thanks for
not that
clarifying
there's
that.
not that there's anything wrong with that, at all. It's just not my thing. I think I would look quite bad in a ball gown, but I do a lot. Thanks to Google, I do a lot of research. So I actually dress up my characters, the male and female. I really have to sort of imagine what they would look like when they enter a room. So I
Hmm.
sort of imagine their outfits, and then thanks to the magic of the internet, I can go to Vogue.com and look at runway shows, and go shopping for these characters. So for Lucy, like, I have a whole file on my computer right now that's all the different outfits she's worn in my book, and they're based on real outfits from real designers or boutiques
Yeah,
or whatever. So that's the magic of the internet. You can travel, you can be attending fashion shows even when you're not actually there.
sure. Uh, Now I want to talk about another contagion, the contagion of racism in the US. The spotlight's been on it even more so now, after not just what happened to George Floyd and a lot of other, the whole BLM movement,
Mhm.
but also the fact that Trump decided to give the nomenclature of China virus to COVID, and then the backlash and the vilification that the Chinese Asian community in the US has faced. Would you like to talk about that?
I mean, yes. I mean, it's been very, very concerning, and I think it was one of the things that really got me so fired up that I had to volunteer. In the last campaign, I just felt it was imperative that I could do whatever I could, because it really began with my mother. Very early on in the pandemic, she was taking a walk outside her home one night, and a stranger began yelling at her. You know, and my mother has lived on her street for 35 years. She's a pillar of the community. All her neighbors know her. She's beloved. So to see some stranger just start yelling at her and saying, "Are you from China?" And she, very proudly answered back, "No, I'm not. I'm from Singapore." You know what I mean? That really concerned me because, she's an elderly lady living on her own. And just this is the first time it's ever happened. But then I would start hearing stories from friends, from other people. My cousin was spat at in the subway in New York. So I now have, unfortunately, a whole collection of stories from different people of what's happened really in the past year, in terms of the level of racism that has happened suddenly. Because of the actions and words of one man.
Yeah.
So it's very concerning. But I think by and large, Americans are still some of the fairest, most open people in the world. We are all under such a pressure cooker at the moment, I think. And I think for a lot of people who are scared, who are sick, they have to deflect the anger somewhere. And it's just so easy to blame someone else, or to sort of generalize that a whole culture is somehow responsible.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate, but you try to amplify the truth, and you try to sort of help out how you can, and that's all I can do.
Yeah, well, it is sad that this world is getting more and more prejudiced. It's happening across the globe. I think it starts with the leadership, and then it percolates down to people, and it stokes that hatred in them, because this othering of another community or a race, I think you would think that by now there would be some reckoning and this sort of a thing would reduce. But you see that, it'll make headlines and it'll reduce in one part of, say, the US, and then something else will happen somewhere else. And I don't know for how long this pendulum is going to swing this way before, there's some sort of a balance.
Yeah. Well, I'm very hopeful because, I think we have an amazing secret weapon. Not so secret anymore. Her name is Kamala Harris. She is our new vice president. And, I can't tell you just how relieved I am, to have President Biden in the White House and Kamala at his side, and knowing her background, she's the children of immigrants, her mother is Indian, she's our first female Black and Asian American vice president, and I'm just so proud.
I know.
And I have great hope because of that.
Thank you so much, Kevin. There are a lot of audience questions, so I think I'm going to now take some of those. So the first one is from Sukanya Chatterjee. Kevin, were you okay with the film being a lot different from your book? She's talking about Crazy Rich Asians, obviously.
I was. I really felt that, first of all, I think they did an amazing job. John Chu really, and the screenwriter Pete Chiarelli. My book was over 500 pages long, had 30,000 different characters and storylines, and it needed to be focused, and they needed to make some changes to make it coherent and make it a Hollywood movie. So I knew there were going to be changes, and I loved the way they really rendered them, so sensitively, and came up with some really brilliant things that I wish I had written, that I wish I could take credit for. For example, the famous mahjong scene,
Yeah.
towards the end of the movie, where Michelle Yeoh is just so superb. Wish I had written that one, but I didn't. But it really made the story, and the movie so good. So I'm very happy.
There's a question from Lilette Liu. By the way, Calcutta has a very large Chinese population. They immigrated to India many generations ago, and I think it is about 5,000 to 6,000 Chinese people. I know large parts of the world have Chinatowns, but in India, that's the only proper, authentic, big Chinatown that we have.
In Calcutta.
In Calcutta.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
And you get the most phenomenal Chinese food there, and they speak Hindi and they speak Bengali. They're homogenized in that sense.
So most of them moved how many, like a few hundred years ago, or within the last sort of century? Just out of curiosity.
No, I think that over the past 100 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know for Singaporeans, a lot of Singaporeans.
Maybe longer. I could be wrong. Be wrong. It's possibly longer because I think they're 8th generation or something now.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I know, for example, a lot of Singaporeans, the wealthy ones, during World War II, they fled and sought safe harbor in India. So my uncle, for example, he went to medical school in Mumbai, back then Bombay.
Was that right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh. And then my godmother also was in Bombay, I think, working for the British Secret Service.
Oh, really?
In India. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. But
that should be in a novel one day.
So I hope so. Yeah, but it's good to hear about the Chinese of Calcutta. I did not know about that. Yeah.
So Lilette Liu is asking you, I have family in Canada, Kolkata, and London, as well as San Francisco. You are possibly similar. How do family reunions pan out, and is there a novel there?
Yeah, I have family spread out all over the world, which is both a blessing and a curse in a way. But we all meet up, at different. Every few years, there's always a big sort of reunion. Most recently, my mother turned 80 last year, and so there was a huge, cousins from all around the world came to help her celebrate, and that was a nice reunion, I have to say. And then several years before that, I think my mother's generation, they all met up for a cruise, So people try to get together as much as they can, and thankfully they still can in this day and age.
How does your family react to your success, your family outside of the US?
It's quite mixed, I have to say. I have some relatives who are tremendously supportive and really excited and very happy. And then there are some who are just simply baffled. They don't understand what the big deal is. They haven't read my books. They haven't seen the movies. They don't care.
Are you serious?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And they just, so it really runs the gamut. But I think by and large, they're happy. They're very happy for me.
Samriddhi Bhattacharya asks, what was the inspiration for Crazy Rich Asians? Was it because you wanted people of the world to know how the Chinese in Singapore really are and live? Or was it because you felt since you knew their culture well, it was a comfortable space to begin with?
It really began as I was just jotting down memories. It really was an exercise in I wrote this book, first of all, for myself. So I never had the intention of getting it published. It was meant to be a collection of short stories that I was just trying to just experiment and play with and keep for myself and maybe share with some friends. So the inspiration really came from my childhood and growing up in Singapore, and then also traveling back to Asia over the years and the strange things that would happen to me whenever I went to visit relatives in Hong Kong or Thailand or even Australia. It just, things would get more and more outrageous as people got richer and richer. And this was in such contrast to my life. I was living in New York. I'm a writer. And then I go visit cousins in Hong Kong, and they're just living in a whole other level. And so, I wanted to remember some of these things for myself. So it was a way to sort of make sense of it originally,
Okay,
and
I have
became
an
a book.
answer to
Yeah.
I have an answer to when the Chinese actually came. Right since the 18th century, because there have been trade links between China and India.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So I was wrong
That
when I
makes
said just
sense.
a century.
Yeah, but why Kolkata? I wonder. How did that
It
become
was
the
a very
hub?
important port. It was a very
Okay,
important port, and that's where the
that's
East
right.
India Company
Yeah,
had set their headquarters.
that
You actually
totally makes
really should
sense.
visit.
Yeah,
It's a really special city.
yeah.
It's it's I can't even easily describe it. It's very different from whatever you've seen and loved in India. And I know
Hmm.
that you have a special connection with India, but
Hmm.
Calcutta really is different.
Yeah, I mean,
In that
I'm
sense.
sure every city, every state, it's all so different, right? So I
But it's
need
also
to spend more
steeped in
time.
that
Yeah,
old world, the Raj, and that
yeah,
sort of a thing.
right.
Um, Narayan wants to know, does the realization of the identity question grow with age?
Hmm. I definitely think so. At least for me, it has. I think I've my consciousness has grown, and I think also my appreciation has grown. For my heritage, for my family, and I see that also a lot of times with my cousins. I have a lot of cousins, some of them American-born Chinese, who for so long sort of were in denial of their heritage. I think in their sort of desire to sort of assimilate, for example, they really sort of don't want to deal with family, don't want to deal with my Asian side. I'm all American. But as you grow and as you mature, and I think as you have your own children, you know, um, things change. So,
Yeah.
you know, for me, it took me 25 years to even begin writing a book about my Asian roots. For so many years, I just wouldn't go anywhere near it. So,
Reena Thakur wants to know what next? When is your new book out? See, people are already waiting for the next book.
I'm really in research phase. So for the next book, so I really hope to begin writing it this year, and I hope to have more than 4 months to write this next book this time. So perhaps it could come out in 2022. That's a possibility. But
Oh,
I can't promise anything really because the world is changing every minute. And for the time being, I've been very busy working on a television project.
right.
So that's really been doing a lot of writing for that, and that's sort of consuming my life at the moment. But that too will end, and then I can go back to writing the next novel. So hopefully, sooner rather than later.
Any tips to writing tips to first-time writers, aspiring writers?
I always say it's really important to like dive in deep and tell your own story. And I think to really not try to picture an audience,
Hmm.
and try to not, I think for me, my success came in not thinking of like, ooh, who's going to publish this, or ooh, I have to try to impress this editor or this critic or this and that. It really, really came from the heart, and I think that's what made it stand out, because it came from a very authentic place. So I always tell writers, like, just really, really sort of try to be as true to your voice as possible, and I think that's how you write something original.
What was that quote in your book towards the last few pages? When you're true to yourself. Can
When
you
you
finish
when
that for
you
me?
align with the truth of yourself, everything is possible. I think I'm
Yeah,
paraphrasing very badly. Yeah.
yes, but I
But,
think that
yeah.
sort of applies to writing as well,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I mean, has that been your experience of your novels?
It has. And also, I try not to imagine. You see, all of us do tend to want to sound clever sometimes, and you have to be careful of that, especially while writing satire.
Hmm.
And so I read this tip by Elizabeth Gilbert only recently on Instagram saying that when you're writing a book, pretend you're writing a letter to a friend.
Hmm.
Because then that's more intimate. You're not thinking of an audience. You're
Yeah.
in that sense, and you're not thinking, let me impress this person with just what funny jokes I can crack. Or
Hmm.
a lot of Indian writing tends to rely a lot on heavy vocabulary because that's our cultural baggage that we have from the colonial
Mhm.
past. So I think I try to keep it simple myself because I just feel I'm going to tell this story and this is how I'm going to do it. But it's all process. So,
Yeah.
one learns as one goes along, and one has to keep reminding yourself that just do it just for yourself.
Yeah. No, I
Exactly.
always say, like, when I write, I try to make myself laugh. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
as long as I'm laughing, that's all I care about, And if you're
I
not
hope
into the joke,
everybody read your footnotes because your
yeah,
footnotes in this book, it has a lot of footnotes.
yeah.
They were hilarious.
Thank
It was
you.
like you and the audience, we were all in on a joke that was
Mhm.
going on. And that sort of, you put a lot of distance between yourself and the story you're telling. And it's great to know that the writer is on your side, or he's
Yeah.
teaming up with you and helping you laugh at all of that. So I
Thank
think
you.
that we should be wrapping up now. Thank you so much on behalf of Kolkata Literature Meet. And thank you so much for having this wonderful conversation with me. It is always so much fun to chat with you,
Same
Kevin.
here. And thank you for agreeing to do this, really. I mean, it's
Oh,
always such a pleasure to chat with you, and I feel like we could keep on going for hours, but we'll probably bore
I
everyone.
know.
But we'll chat offline. But it's been such a
We'll chat
pleasure.
offline.
And thank you for all the lovely questions, and thanks for all being here today. On this it's Sunday morning now, right? I think
That's right.
in Kolkata and the rest of India. So thank you for spending a bit of your Sunday with me. So really appreciate it, and hope I can come
Great
visit in
seeing
person.
you.
Yeah,
Yes, that'll be great if you can come to Calcutta. So
would love
enjoy
to.
your Saturday evening.
Thank you. Going straight to bed, I think, but thank you.
Is that right? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Speak soon,
All right.
Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, take care. Yeah.
Thank you.